Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Achieving Cyber Resilience in Healthcare, a New Solution for Security and Defense. On behalf of Becker's Healthcare, thank you for joining us. Before we begin, I'm going to walk through a few quick housekeeping instructions. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation, and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. Today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar to access the recording. If at any time you don't see your slides moving or have trouble with the audio, please try refreshing your browser. You can also submit any technical questions into the Q&A box, and we are happy to help. With that, I'm pleased to introduce today's presenters, Todd Felker, Executive Healthcare Strategist with CrowdStrike, and Greg Thomas, Solutions Engineer with Medigate by Claroty. Todd and Greg, thank you for being here today, and I will now turn the floor over to you.
All right, thank you so much, and welcome to the webinar today. Greg Thomas, Solutions Engineer with Medigate by Claroty. Just to give you a bit about me, I spent the majority of my background designing and securing infrastructure in the government space prior to moving over to the healthcare vertical. And since I've been over in the healthcare vertical, I see a lot of similarities, but there are a lot of differences in healthcare and securing these healthcare organizations.
Great, thanks, Greg. And I'm Todd Felker. I've been at CrowdStrike for about a year now, and before I came to CrowdStrike, I spent nearly 30 years in different facets of healthcare IT leadership. And the last 8 or 9 was building a security program for a health system in Southern California, and where I was both a customer, an early customer of CrowdStrike, and also a couple of years later of Medigate. So I'm pretty familiar with our topic today, and excited to be here and add whatever color commentary I can with Greg to this important topic.
All right, well, thank you so much, Todd. Let's jump right in. So how did we get here, and why now? Why is there so much urgency in the healthcare vertical now to try to secure the medical devices? And some of the things we've learned over the last couple of years is healthcare is now the top target when it comes to ransomware. How did we get here? So, a few years ago in 2009, the Electronic Medical Records Act was established, and it required healthcare agencies to connect all their medical devices to their networks. Reason being to expedite patient care, sharing of information between providers for patients, also maybe, just sending over a prescription to a pharmacy. That required all these devices to be now connected to the network in these organizations. Now, none of these devices were designed with security in mind. When the manufacturers were making these devices in the late 90s or 80s, and even some devices I've seen manufactured back in the 70s, security is an afterthought. It was not incorporated into the design of these devices. Now that they're connected to the network, we're all trying to, work backwards and figure out how do we secure these medical devices that are now attached to our networks. The threat actors, a lot of ransomware, if you see here on the screen, we've got, FBI issuing new warnings and things like that. Ransomware, initially was targeted towards the banking industry, very lucrative at the time to, hold a bank hostage and, demand a ransom for whatever files and data to extract from them. But what these threat actors have learned is healthcare is a more lucrative industry. For example, patient health records on the black market go for around, $1,000 a pop, versus stealing, credit card information, they're right around $10, $15 a pop. So what would you target? Would you continue to work on the banking industry, or would you look for a more lucrative file that you can capture and, add to your repertoire? Another thing that we've learned in healthcare, the reason that they're being targeted is because, again, a lot of these medical devices out there were not designed with any security in mind whatsoever. And protecting those devices is problematic. Security and information security guys cannot use the same methods that they use to secure traditional IT resources. That they can't use those on the medical devices. Number one, they're running in outdated operating systems. They're very you can't scan those devices. You may knock them offline, and so forth. We've also learned that in healthcare, oftentimes healthcare organizations will pay the ransom. So if I'm a threat actor and I'm looking for a target, not only are the assets or the data that I'm acquiring is more valuable, even if the organization decides, hey, well, they've got all of our data, we're going to have to pay the ransom. They're going to get paid twice. They're going to get the ransom. You're going to pay it, and then they still got access to all your data. Sometimes the organizations don't have the means to recover from a ransomware attack, so they think that paying the ransom will get them all their data back, and then they find out, well, we're out of all this money, and we still don't have a solution to recover from. Okay. Now, Todd, what have you seen in your experience?
I just thought I'd throw in that, one of the things that I struggled with as a security leader in healthcare was gaining visibility to these devices. I knew they were vulnerable, and yet it was always a bit scary to scan them with your vulnerability scanner because they didn't have normal operating systems on these devices, and you were afraid of causing a problem if you did too aggressive of a scan in order to try to identify them. So until there really was these identity, these IoT platforms to help you see and understand the vulnerabilities on these devices, a lot of security practitioners were driving blind on how to wrap their arms around how many of these were on the network and how vulnerable they were, because we didn't want to cause any harm in the clinical environment.
Absolutely. And, that's some of the challenges that we see across the healthcare vertical is healthcare is unique. Oftentimes there are different silos within the organization that are responsible or share some responsibility for the connected medical devices and even the managed devices throughout the organization. For example, you may have clinical engineering and some people in facilities that they're responsible for preventive maintenance on these medical devices. They may be responsible for cleaning the devices, making sure that there are enough devices available to support the organization, but they're not concerned with security whatsoever. And on the other hand, the security professionals that have traditionally managed security for the entire organization, they don't have a real good understanding of how these devices are used. So they can't apply those same security controls to those. They can't, use vulnerability management scanners that you mentioned, Todd, because they're afraid they may knock those devices offline, all right? They may be attached to a patient. They also, the IT and security guys, what I found, they're learning now that, hey, what the clinical engineers have known all along is there is no patch for this device. The manufacturer has not released a new version of the operating system. So even if I know what that device is, I know how it's being used, what is it that I can do to mitigate the risk for that device? And finally, understanding the workflows. If I know what the device is and, maybe I'm a security engineer, I want to apply some policies or apply some firewall rules to protect that device. I don't understand the context. I don't know how that device is used. I don't know what it needs to connect to throughout the organization. Okay.
And it really helps to get these parts of the organization involved in the conversation. Years ago, when I first go to facilities actually viewed patches as a risk because it was a change to a device that was working. And it was a lot of education that had to be done with them in particular on the fact that there is risk by doing nothing, because their whole goal is just to keep things up and running. And they don't like any changes at all, because if it's working, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So having to educate them on the risks of cyber vulnerabilities was a huge part of my job. And then when you get to Biomed's all about servicing the equipment and keeping it up and running, but they weren't necessarily up to date or up to speed on how vulnerable some of these devices were. So gaining an understanding of the risks and the specific vulnerabilities and how exploitable certain vulnerabilities are is a really important thing for the security teams to be aware of.
Yeah. And Todd, have you seen any structural changes or organizational changes as the healthcare organizations try to get a handle on managing and securing these medical devices?
Yeah, a lot of organizations have even taken the biomed department, which is traditionally viewed as a clinical department, and moving it into IT. because so many more of these devices are being attached to the network. Every year, there's more devices. Ventilators used to always kind of be standalone. And, you know, now we had COVID and we had all this talk about ventilators and manufacturing of them and everything. Most of them are connected to the network now because they want to track and capture, you know, breaths per minute and all that stuff and send it off to the electronic medical record. And so this whole push to get patient data and all these measurements with these devices into the medical record to get more information has really caused a shift in biomed. And so now biomed's quite often part of the IT department now.
Yeah, and have you been able to quantify the financial impact of managing the medical devices or mitigating the risk for those medical devices?
Well, I don't know about mitigating the financial piece of it, but what the shift is that I've seen is that it traditionally was just viewed as like, well, we can't afford to replace or upgrade these devices. Maybe they're end of life. Maybe a lot of these devices sometimes are in use for decades. And what has to be done now is the specific vulnerabilities and the chances of an exploit, which raises the risk, has to be measured so that CFOs and finance departments can factor that in to evaluating whether or not they can afford to replace a device. Because the cost of the device has to be weighed against the risk for keeping it online.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You know, and another unique thing that we see across all verticals is the expansion of the XIoT or extended Internet of Things. You know, often when I have a conversation with customers, they're surprised. You know, we start our conversation around, you know, the basic visibility, learning about all the connected medical devices in the organization. And then when we start talking about operational technology and the building management systems, there's often a big, oh, wow moment. I didn't realize how much risk they pose to the healthcare organization. You know, for example, you know, some of our customers have told us that, you know, losing an elevator or a couple of elevators can be detrimental to care or delivering patient care because they can no longer transport patients around the hospital from, you know, the patient room or possibly to surgery. We also saw during, you know, the pandemic, you know, how important the refrigeration system is. With some of the vaccines, they had to be maintained at a certain temperature. So losing the refrigeration system is just as detrimental as losing some of the medical devices and so forth. We know that, you know, IoT, these devices are continually being added to the network more and more every single day. And we have to manage those the same way that we manage the managed and the unmanaged medical devices in the organization.
Yeah, I'll just throw in really quick. One of the things I learned, Greg, when dealing with our lab and our blood bank is that they have some things like blood and platelets and different types of things that are really critical to patient care that have to be stored within very precise ranges of temperatures. And so measuring the temperature probes, which are networked inside of those refrigerators, is really critical, because if it goes too far out of range, then the hospital can't use the product that's in those fridges anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one thing that we've done at Medigate by Claroty is, you know, we've always focused on the healthcare vertical, but we also understand the importance of all the connected assets in the organization, the entire ecosystem. Anything that is connected and communicating could, you know, be a point of risk for the organization. And so we strive to identify and provide that same level of detail for every single device that is connected to an organization's network. Okay. You know, another unique challenge in healthcare is going to be around all the different regulations, right? Fairly new in the healthcare industry. I saw it, you know, years ago in industrial, where, you know, hey, your PCI compliance and all these regulators would come in and they would do a security assessment to tell you whether or not you could take a credit card transaction and so forth. And I think in healthcare, we're in the very early stages. We have the 405D group that has, you know, they produced a few guidelines on, you know, how to secure medical devices and so forth. But what's your experience, Todd, you know, working through some of these regulations as these regulations have come out in the last few years?
Yeah, this is really, really evolving, just every year. And so this is just going to continue. And I think it's really going to ramp up in the next 12 to 24 months for sure. If you look at, so HHS 405D, that's interesting. It's kind of, I view it as a program, as a resource, and like a task group between industry and the federal government based on raising awareness on and mitigating risks of, of devices in the healthcare sector specifically. And that's kind of sanctioned by the HHS group. So that's just kind of something that's providing, some guidelines and some conversation to raise awareness. But then when you start getting into HIPAA and you start looking at this IoT explosion that's happening, I know Greg, you and I talked about how this is just an exploding market. It's supposed to double from like over $72 billion in 2020 to over to about $190 million expected by 2025. So there's a lot more of these devices coming out. And I've even heard about them putting like Alexa in patient rooms for requesting, and changing channels on TV and stuff like that. And the problem is there's a lot of these devices. They might be recording audio, they might be recording your voice when even, if you're not talking to it. And some of these devices are actually transmitting PHI. And the security folks may not even be aware which devices have PHI on them. So there is a challenge in understanding with specific devices whether PHI, ePHI is in scope or not. So getting an understanding of that is important in order to be compliant with HIPAA. Then you get into both the Protecting and Transforming Cyber Health Act, which is also called the Patch Act. This came out this year. It's submitted legislation. It hasn't been passed yet, but it's being reviewed, as well as the Strengthening Cybersecurity for Medical Devices Act. That just was something that was presented in June. And both of those are expected to move forward at some point, and they're really going to put some teeth into how organizations can manage their IoT devices. And then we have President Biden's, sorry, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so are those mandates, or are they just guidelines or recommendations? Do the manufacturers need to follow these? Do the healthcare organizations have to follow these, or just a recommendation?
I think their legislation aimed at putting a framework around what the responsibilities are of both manufacturers and healthcare providers in how to reduce the risk of IoT in healthcare and IoMT, clinical devices. And I really feel like part of it, and I believe that the Cybersecurity for Medical Devices Act actually has a lot of focus on the manufacturers, putting more responsibility on them on not only building cybersecurity into the devices, but on mitigating vulnerabilities as they're discovered after devices are deployed. And so I think it's just really designed to make this a stronger conversation with more specific responsibilities defined on both sides of the fence.
Okay. And has the Joint Commission, how are they involved with this? Are they actually, when they come in to do their yearly audits, are they including any of the medical devices, or is that something that's going to happen in the future?
That's funny that you mentioned that, because I just heard recently that starting in early 2023, the Joint Commission is now going to have IoMT in scope during their audits. What does that mean? We're really not sure yet, but they will be looking at this.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we can imagine. We can both guess that some of that's going to require you to, number one, have a good inventory of all your medical devices and know what's connected in your organization, similar to some of the other regulations that have come out from the government, PCI and so forth, where they're going to come in and look at everything that you have in your inventory. They're going to determine, do you have any type of endpoint? How are you protecting these devices? Give me a copy of your network architectural drawings and so forth to see how secure you are. And if you have any type of incident management programs in place to manage, response if you do get breached or something happens in the organization. Mm-hmm. Okay. Would you agree, Todd?
Yes, I do.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about how we help with, these things we've covered so far. First and foremost, the partnership between Medigate and and CrowdStrike. It's one of the best relationships I've seen, or alliances that I've seen between two partners. And the reason being is we complement each other. You know, we focus on identifying all the connected devices that are unmanaged in an organization. And we have to do that in a passive manner. So we don't want to interrogate any medical devices. You can't use those traditional tools to scan or do any type of brute force attacks to find out what a device is. So we simply listen to traffic in a passive manner, and we're able to identify all of those connected assets. It's not enough to just know that I've got, 1,000 infusion pumps, or I've got, 50 CT scanners and so forth. In order to manage and mitigate risk, you have to know a lot more detail about each and every device, such as the make, the model, the manufacturer, what's the operating system version, what's the application version, what is this device communicating with, what is its workflow in the organization. And we do all that in our discovery phase. And likewise, CrowdStrike is doing the exact same thing with the EDR agent. They can deploy on a endpoint that supports it to provide that same level of detail about what the device is. Gaining that visibility and insights, step number one. And from that point, you can then make some decisions, right? You can determine what risk that device poses to the organization, right? How risky is it? Where is it located in the organization? What network is it connected to? How often is the device being used? And once you've calculated risk for the device, you can determine, how do I want to protect that device? What existing tools do I have? Maybe I can, do some network segmentation for this device. Maybe I've got CrowdStrike installed, which can automatically protect that endpoint and prevent it from communicating with different things. And of course, you have to continually monitor. Once you've made that discovery, you've got some processes in place. Maybe you've got your risk management, processes down. You have to continually monitor that, because there's always going to be new devices introduced to the organization, application updates, changes, new vulnerabilities coming out, and so forth. So it's kind of a cycle or a big circle where, I discover, I walk through all those steps, I protect my device, I monitor, maybe I need to go back and do some more discovery and so forth. But we always want to get to optimizing the entire fleet of medical devices that you have in the organization so that you can use them more effectively. Maybe it's just a matter of moving devices from one department to another so you've got more available. Or maybe you have some devices that are not being used at all that you can add to your inventory and fleet, simply because you didn't know where they were, and so forth. So Todd, on the customer journey, what is it that you saw, being a Medigate customer, moving over to CrowdStrike, seeing these two platforms work together? What are some of the key things that you can tell us about how it made your life easier as a customer?
Oh, sure. So there was lots of ways. So first of all, it was just the visibility that I was given once I lit this up, and the fact that I could go into a dashboard and see all the devices, see their operating systems, see their vulnerabilities, sort them by risk score. So the data that's provided, where you actually looking at the vulnerability, taking into fact some context about maybe where it is on the network and how many devices may have access to it, and factoring that in and giving me a CVSS score, a common vulnerability security score on the device, so that I can prioritize and see which ones were most vulnerable, was amazing. But there was a lot more operational efficiencies beyond that. I was able to, by having the integration with CrowdStrike and being able to now have all of the managed devices show up in the Claroty, Medigate dashboard, I could now see all my managed devices and the unmanaged devices, and a light bulb went off when that first got turned on for me. I was able to go to the antivirus kind of column, because there wasn't an EDR column, but it's an antivirus column in the dashboard, and unselect CrowdStrike. Then go to the operating system column and remove like a lot of the real-time operating system things that like the smaller IoT devices have, and just select like Linux and Windows and Mac. And basically what I was left with was the best report I'd ever seen of all the vendor managed equipment on my network. And then,
Yeah, Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
What were you going to say?
excellent point. I mean, because that visibility, not only can you now see all the devices, you know which devices you have the agent installed on that you're able to protect, via software, versus the devices that maybe I can install an agent on, but I just wasn't aware of what the operating stack was. And which is another thing that our platform, provides you with is the manufacturer disclosure agreement. So I can see, once you can see the operating system that a device has, you can see the application version. I know whether or not I've got CrowdStrike installed on that device. I can also look at that MDS2 form and determine whether or not the manufacturer will allow me to install an agent on that device.
And I can even go on about like the integration with the vulnerability scanner and how that helped me too.
Yeah,
But,
absolutely. Absolutely. Please elaborate.
So I was able to take, because of the integration with Rapid7 that you guys had, I was able to take the assets that that I knew were like clinical IoT devices that the vulnerability scanner probably wouldn't even understand the operating system for anyway, and then export that into the Rapid7 console and tell Rapid7 not to scan those devices. That helped me in multiple ways. First, it saved me by licensing on the vulnerability scanner, which was licensed by IP address. So I was able to take thousands of clinical IoT devices, reduce the cost of scanning on my vulnerability scanner, and then I was able to enjoy the benefit of my scanner running quicker because it didn't have to scan all those things and try to figure out what they were. And it just made everything more efficient. It was awesome.
Yeah, so we strive to, at the end of the day, we're a data collection company. We're collecting data points about every device connected to the network. And then we will integrate and share all that information with all your existing security tools in the organization. So as Todd mentioned, vulnerability management, don't want to scan the medical devices. And we can feed that information real time into those platforms. So you now know where all those devices are and can reduce your costs because you don't have to buy a large block of IP addresses and the entire organization. Yeah. Now, when we talk about risk in an organization, one thing that we do is our risk methodology is we're going to look at the device itself to determine what do we know about the device, what's the operating system, what's the application version, what are the known vulnerabilities, are there any manufacturer recalls for that device. We're also going to look at how that device is connected into the network, into the organization. Is it in a segmented network segment? Is it communicating with the internet or command and control domains? Are there any policies that are applied to that device via network access control or maybe a firewall? And finally, we're going to look at the severity or the impact to the organization, right? If that device is compromised. So is it potential patient harm or death? Is it just a financial impact and so forth? So those are all the things that we use to calculate a risk score based on every device that we discover in the organization. However, we understand that every organization is different. What may be risky to hospital 1 is totally okay with hospital number 2. So we wanted to provide our customers with a way to come in and tailor the risk scoring methodology, tailor it to each individual organization. For example, maybe I've got a CT scanner that is in the surgery department versus one that's in an outpatient clinic. Obviously, they may pose a different financial impact to the organization if the one in surgery is compromised versus the one that's in an outpatient clinic. So we give our customers the ability to come in and modify and tailor the weighting of each one of the risk factors so that it meets the organizational needs. There is not a risk matrix out of the box. I've done hundreds of security assessments and been involved with them. And typically the assessors will come in and they'll have a little chart and they'll have you check a few boxes that say, okay, well, you passed this risk assessment this time. And they'll use that same formula at the next customer and the next customer. And we understand that that is not the way that you number one, identify risk and manage risk in the organization. You must customize the risk to the organizational needs. And, how were you able to use this in your organization, Todd?
Yeah, so I think this is where you kind of get into the art of IOMT. And that is for the security team to apply context based upon how the devices are used in their environment. If you have a device that is more critical to a specific, like you mentioned, the surgery center or operating room, then, you know, obviously the clinical impact and patient risk might elevate the risk of a certain device depending upon the context that it's being used at. So taking into account, like you said, the location and the application to the type of patient care involved is important in being able to apply and measure risk. And that's basically what we're getting to now, is being able to have these risk-based conversations throughout the organization, and getting visibility is the first step into having these conversations so that you can now get really dialed into what is the real risk to the business of patient care. And so that's how these conversations happen. And it starts with this type of visibility, and then being able to tweak that risk and have meaningful conversations about it.
Yeah, and one thing I like to add is measuring risk is not a moment in time. You know, security auditors come in and they'll do a risk assessment. They'll give you a score that particular day of the week. Tomorrow that could change. You know, I spent a lot of time in my career patching and, you know, updating operating systems and so forth, but we had no way to measure the risk. You know, we apply 1,000 patches to devices. I have no idea if that's increasing the risk or decreasing the risk. And what we do in real time is we update those risk scores. You know, if you apply a patch to a device or you move a device to an isolated network segment, in real time, you always know what risk that device poses to the organization, which is very helpful. Okay. Now, what are the desired outcomes? So, Todd, I'll pass to you here. Being a healthcare professional for over 30 years, what did you guys strive? What was your plan to reach operational resilience and cyber resilience within your organization?
The most important thing I'd say, Greg, is that this is a journey. And, you know, I've heard, you know, terms like boil the ocean, and how do you boil the ocean, or how do you eat an elephant, right? It's, you know, and the fact is you need to kind of start by taking some steps. The first thing is to get visibility. Once you have visibility, then you start factoring in what we were talking about, is how vulnerable are the devices, you know, and a lot of times that might be how old is the firmware? Can it be upgraded? Is it still supported? How do I start by reducing risk? And really what you need to do is look and figure out, like, where's my biggest risk? How do I get started at reducing that? Now, for me, and what I think most organizations do, is the largest population of IoT devices in most healthcare delivery organizations is infusion pumps. And then coincidentally, the infusion pumps, what do? Well, they dispense medications, many times life-saving and life-supporting medications to the patients. So clearly a critical piece of patient care. So that's a great place to start. And that's where I started, that, and then also the pharmacy medication dispensing cabinets. A lot of times those have those high-class narcotics in them that you kind of really want to protect and make sure that they're secured. And so those were like the two things we started with. And we actually worked on a way to not only come up with a plan for Biomed to patch those devices, but also to implement network access controls to them. And that's kind of how we started. And this is the type of thing that you're never done with, Greg. You start to make and reduce the risk surface, and then you just keep going. And eventually you want to get to the point to where you're evaluating these devices before they even get on your network. I remember, probably 15 years ago when I was working with the network team, and they got a call that, a whole truckload of infusion pumps showed up at the dock, and they had to put 2,000 of these things on the network, and they were running out of DHCP addresses. You want to get IT and security involved in these devices before they're made. Make sure they're aware so that they can plan for it, and that security is aware of the risks of any devices that are coming in. And then, hey, imagine that even security might have a say into which brand or which type of device you buy because of security. That's where we're going.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And as you look across this slide here, IT security, biomed, operations, and facilities management, it's really key to have all those groups working on the same page, same sheet of music, as you stated. Everybody have a great understanding of all the existing connected devices in the organization. Everyone understand the processes and the workflows for those devices. And when it comes to making purchases and decisions, instead of biomed or facility just going out and buying new devices because someone in the organization said, I like this particular brand, there's an evaluation process before you introduce any new risk to the organization to make the best decision on what the next product may be. Okay? And, as Gartner said, just like you were mentioning, Todd, the journey to achieving resilience is always first with awareness, identification, understanding the existing ecosystem, all the devices that you have within the organization. Where I see a lot of organizations that I work with, they're stuck somewhere in between, phase 1 and phase 2 here. They know there's an issue. They know they don't have a good up-to-date inventory. They want to gain visibility, but they just don't know how to get there, right? The existing security tools that they have are not providing enough detail about all the connected medical devices. So we work with those guys to get through phase number 2, and we, kind of accelerate the process. Once we've got that identification, a good database of all the devices, determining the risk those devices pose in phase 3, and getting into a, phase 4, where they can then start to mitigate and manage the risk, either using existing security tools or, creating different processes within the organization to prevent the firefighting, right? The last thing you want to do is have to fight fires every day. You want to find a way to manage these devices and make it just another operational thing that you're doing on a daily basis. Let's go back here. You have any comments here, Todd?
No, just that, that's kind of what I was alluding to on the last slide, was that whole integration piece. And, I remember like when I first plugged in Medigate, I could see when all of a sudden there was a couple of robots showed up on the network. And then I was able to go say, hey, did we just buy some robots? And found out it was something we're evaluating. So, the platform is there to give you the visibility when new things pop up, but it's also great for like creating those conversations to build in operational efficiencies and getting security injected into the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're trying to cover the entire ecosystem in the organization, from the network discovery, the vulnerability management platforms, providing some operational intelligence so that customers can make better decisions when they purchase new devices. Utilization management, another thing. So our operational efficiency module that we have, which I'm sure you use a little bit, Todd, provides detailed data on how and when and where devices are being used. So if you've got hope, God forbid, we have another pandemic and there's a need for more infusion pumps throughout the organization, you got the data at your fingertips. You know exactly how many devices you have. You know where they're being used. Maybe I can move one from one facility to another. And we've added in also threat detection or indicators of compromise as well for these devices. So as the manufacturers release information, the FDA releases alerts, recall notifications, and so forth. All of our customers have that information at their fingertips instantly.
Yeah, when we did a POV with Medigate, I remember specifically showing this to Biomed and how excited they were, because we were able to easily integrate it with our wireless infrastructure and our location facility maps, and they could see where devices were at. Our biomed department saved over 40 hours a week looking for devices after we turned this on, because they literally had guys sometimes running around trying to find out what closet some piece of equipment was stuck in, because they had no idea where it was. So now they're getting location context on devices. When they go to service devices, they're not having to hunt for them as much as they were before. And when you talked about how devices are being used, I remember that I showed the imaging team that they could see that specific MRI or X-ray machines were using what parts of the body they were being used to treat on a patient. And they were showing that, like, hey, this machine is doing like 75% on like shoulders and torso. and this one is on knees and lower body. And they actually understood more about the patient clinical flow going on in the organization that they didn't have before, just because they never had access to that type of intelligence about how their devices were being used. It was very powerful, and it got me a lot of friends asking for access to the platform to get to visibility to this type of like clinical data. It was very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Sharing of that information across the entire organization helped the whole organization make better decisions. An example for what you just mentioned there, one of our customers using that data of how a CT scanner was being used, they were able to squeeze in a couple of more CT scans a day just by, rescheduling appointments, right? Maybe do all my head and neck scans early in the morning versus late in the afternoon, which requires, some downtime to reconfigure this machine and so forth. Now, we've also started, a partnership or an alliance with all of the medical device manufacturers out there. And of course, with some of our top clients that we have, the executives from those teams. And the goal here is just to bring all these groups together so they can share information about what they're seeing. What are some of their challenges? How do they help resolve some of those challenges? From the manufacturers, understanding and trying to encourage them to build more security into the design of your medical devices, right? Why are you still releasing devices that have, Windows XP as the underlying operating system? We know that operating system, was outdated 10 years ago now. And, educating our customers and allowing them to see exactly what the manufacturers are doing provides them with the opportunity to make, again, better decisions on the devices that they're purchasing. We know that it's going to be a long process for the manufacturers to get up to date with the way that they're designing these devices and providing, devices that are more secure. So when you first purchase a device and connect it to your network, you don't have to worry about it as much as you do now. But that's going to take a long time to get there with these manufacturers. And oftentimes, what we see right now for the devices, medical connected devices that we cannot install a CrowdStrike agent on, the only option that most customers have to mitigate risk for those devices is some type of network control. Network protection, either by, doing some VLAN isolation, moving all the medical devices to a known network, or maybe using network access control to limit what these devices can talk to, or possibly doing some firewall policies in between data centers or in between facilities to just limit the exposure that these devices have to all the different variants of malware and vulnerabilities and things that are out there. Our platform, we try to make that easy for our customers because we understand the context of these devices and how they're being used. We understand working through the manufacturers and doing research and testing what these devices require to function in an organization, what ports protocols they need to use, what other devices they need to talk to. We use that information to then build out policy. So we build a policy. So the network engineer doesn't need to try to build the policies from scratch. We also give our customers the ability to simulate policy. So one of my greatest fears as a network firewall guy when I was managing those was building out a policy, testing everything that I could think of to test. But the only way I could really see what was going to happen was to push that policy out into the environment and then wait for the calls to come in to see if anything broke, right? When you're working with critical infrastructure, you really just can't take that chance, right? It can cause patient harm. It could be, a monumental outage that you cause. And so what we incorporated into our product was the ability, because we're continually listening to the traffic flows and the streams, we allow our customers to see what the effect of the policy would be prior to them moving to enforcement.
This is, if I could just comment here, Greg. So this is like really where the rubber meets the road. This is where you're actually doing things to reduce the attack surface and minimize risk and try to mitigate reduce the chance of threats to these devices. And so there used to be three main ways that you would do this. One, patch the device or update the firmware, which means working with Biomed and the manufacturer in order to, reduce vulnerabilities. I posted an article on LinkedIn earlier this year. I think the article basically stated that 73% of the infusion pumps that are in use today in healthcare organizations across the country have critical vulnerabilities that came out in 2018, 2019. So a lot of organizations are struggling with how to, just do that and patch these devices by updating firmware. But like you said, if you can't patch it or update the firmware, if for some reason it's not available or the manufacturer is not helping with that, then what you're left with is network segmentation, which is hard and expensive and kind of scary to implement, because now you're putting in all these rules between segments about the types of traffic that can traverse from one part of the network to another in the clinical environment. And so you're creating operational challenges and work with as you implement new products and new things on your network in order to allow the correct traffic to flow from segment to segment.
Yeah.
Network access
Which introduces
control,
risk. That
Yes.
introduces risk itself, doing those network changes and possibly causing havoc.
Yes, very, very hard and expensive to do, because now you're installing very large, heavy-duty firewalls and then having to manage all the rules on them inside your network. Network access control is a great thing to do because you guys provide the profiles for most of the major network access control security products on the market today and make it easy to apply it to just a specific device, one or two devices. And then I worked with Biomed, for example, to test our infusion pumps and make sure they're functioning properly. And we first rolled it out to 1 and then 2, and then we did 10, and then we did the rest of the fleet. We decided that, hey, these policies work and there's no risk to their operational efficiencies.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's describe, what the joint value is to our customers with the Medigate and CrowdStrike integrations. First and foremost, we've determined that we can identify every device connected to your network, and we can share that information directly with CrowdStrike. So CrowdStrike has agents they can install on the managed devices. So for those unmanaged devices, we provide that visibility directly into CrowdStrike. So now you've got one platform where you can see every device connected to your network within your organization. The sharing of information about vulnerabilities. So CrowdStrike has a great repository of knowing all the vulnerabilities that all the managed devices have. They don't have a lot of visibility of the unmanaged devices. And with our passive identification method and doing the correlation, working with the manufacturers, the FDA, ECRI, and so forth, we've got that same information about all those unmanaged assets that we share directly with CrowdStrike. And finally, the LLCs, indicators of compromise. CrowdStrike has an agent installed. We can ingest that data into our platform to help us with the risk scores for a device. Obviously, if a device has an EDR agent installed on it, we will lower the risk score for that device, knowing that there is another means of protection for that device, so forth. And sharing of that information is what makes this value so highly sought after for most of our customers.
Yeah, this is a really important thing that I just want to emphasize a couple things. One is that, yes, now CrowdStrike is going to be aware if an IoT device has strong anomalous behavior. In other words, hey, this one device, you've got 200 of them. This one's acting differently than all the others. And oh, by the way, it's trying to communicate out over the internet. So this device is likely compromised. Let's go ahead and take all of our managed assets and tell them to not communicate with this device so that we are acting. This is true XDR, extended detection and response. And the main thing I want to share here is that our partnership between Claroty and CrowdStrike is very strong, and that what we're going to be doing, we've been spending a lot of time mapping out our data so that it can align and be ingested on both sides of the fence. And very soon, we're going to have all access to all of this OT and IOMT devices in the asset graphic. CrowdStrike providing a very powerful picture to the entire assets in the healthcare space, and we're very excited about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're excited as well, Todd. This has been a long journey. Providing what our healthcare customers have asked us for, and that is complete visibility and an understanding of everything that they have connected in their organization, along with providing recommendations on how they can mitigate the risk. Okay.
And this is a sample. Go ahead, Greg.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Todd.
I was just going to say, this is a great sample of how a specific device is communicating on your network. And I used to look at these all the time in order to understand how the devices were communicating, which ports, which protocols. and where they were communicating with. And the red line here, Greg, I think is kind of highlighting the fact that this is potentially a malicious layer of traffic here that would generate an alert. Is that right, Greg?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're continually watching traffic flow, so we see exactly what a device is communicating with. Through our integration with CrowdStrike, we know indicators of compromise. So if we see a device, communicating with a command and control server, or communicating outside of what the manufacturer's recommendations are for that device, then we can easily alert and point that out and integrate with any SIM products you have in the SOC and so forth. So everybody is aware, we've got an issue here, let's resolve this issue, let's mitigate it.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right, well, thank you guys so much for your time this afternoon. We want to leave a few minutes here to answer any questions that you guys may have. And what do we have here in the queue?
Thank you, Todd and Greg, for that great presentation. And we can, as you said, we can now begin today's question and answer session in the remaining time we have. And a reminder, audience members, you can submit any questions you have by typing them into that Q&A chat box on your webinar console. And we can go ahead, Todd and Greg, get started with this question here that has come in. Are there ways to determine which device risks are more critical and should be addressed first? We'll start there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start there, Todd. So in our methodology of determining risk for devices, we want to know everything about that device: make, model, manufacturer, application version, all known vulnerabilities, any recalls that have been issued by the manufacturer, where that device is connected, what is it communicating to, and finally, what is the severity or impact, financial impact, patient loss or misdiagnosis. We use that to create a risk score and then prioritize, based on the risk scores throughout the organization, what are the riskiest devices to that entity, right? So for all of my devices that have very, very high risk scores, based on the way we calculated that risk, our customers can easily determine which devices they need to focus their attention on first.
Thank you. We have another question here. I'll go ahead and ask this one. The question is, what role have you played in terms of helping organizations meet the requirements for cybersecurity insurance coverage? And then what is your experience concerning cybersecurity insurance?
So I'll take this, Greg, if that's okay. So
yes,
CrowdStrike has been working very, very diligently with cyber insurance brokers in order to help with this, because in healthcare, this is a huge, huge topic. The deductibles have gone up 5x, the coverage has gone up many times, and it's just a huge, huge cost. Like the cost of the cyber liability insurance is just skyrocketed, making healthcare just very difficult to deal with this. And the questionnaires that the security team is getting are long, hundreds of questions that take hours and sometimes even weeks to answer all the questions. And the truth is that we're proactively engaged. Your CrowdStrike account rep can actually help you with getting you involved with some people that focus 100% on the insurance business and brokers and what it is they're looking for. And there's a lot of people like me at CrowdStrike that can help you with your conversations with your cybersecurity brokers and underwriters. But absolutely having visibility to these devices and their risk, and being able to say that, hey, I have this IoMT platform, I'm measuring risk, I'm prioritizing our initiatives, and we are actively reducing the risk of our medical devices in our environment by the data that Claroty and Medigate are able to provide is a huge help in helping with those questionnaires.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And Greg, I don't know if this may be a good question you would like to address, but we have a question. Can Medigate help determine the medical devices that could support EDR but aren't installed?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question. Help support the medical devices that are what?
Yes. So can Medigate help determine the medical devices that could support EDR but aren't installed, is the question?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have within our platform, we have a risk simulator. And what that simulator does is for all the medical devices out there, even if they're not connected to your network, all the medical devices, it allows you to go through and do a risk assessment of those devices based on all the information that the manufacturer has released about that device. For example, you can look at the software bill of materials, everything that the medical manufacturer has installed on that device. And we'll give a risk score so you can then use that to determine, well, do I want to purchase this device or not, right? Or do I want to get a different manufacturer's device because it's a little more secure out of the box?
Wonderful. And we also have a question here. So this person wants to know more about the patch levels in OS that you mentioned. And so the question is, are the two systems sharing that data, and is it being operationalized?
Do you want to take that one?
Yeah,
Greg?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So yes, we are sharing information between the two platforms on the operating system levels and the patch versions that are seen in traffic. For example, the CrowdStrike agent, because it's an agent installed on a device, it can provide us with the complete application stack. So every application that is installed on that device is sent directly over to the Medigate platform. And from there, we use that information to update the risk score for that device. Again, the more information we have about each individual device, the more information we can use to calculate a risk score for that device. We also send for the unmanaged devices that we've discovered, we have the ability to send that information over to CrowdStrike as well. So now CrowdStrike can see all those unmanaged devices that they had no visibility of before, make, model, manufacturer, serial number, and so forth. So yes, we completely share information between the two platforms because we want to provide all the customers with, again, complete visibility of everything that's connected within their organization.
We also have a question here specific to healthcare workers. The question is, how do you protect those workers specifically?
Well, I'll take a stab at it, Greg, and if I leave something out, you can throw something in that if you're aware of something I'm not. But basically, the way I see it is healthcare workers are just really mostly afraid, I think, of causing harm. They just don't want any negative impact on their patients because of anything that they do. And I think that by protecting the devices, we're actually protecting the healthcare workers because we're making sure, helping ensure with as high probability as we can that the devices are operating properly and efficiently without any malware or adversary impacting the way that they function and impact patient care in a negative way.
Yeah, and it can be as simple as, helping the healthcare worker identify where a device is located. If, I need a new CT scanner or infusion pump, within our platforms, it's very easy for them to track where those devices are, when they're being used, and, go grab one off the floor and use it, in nursing, wherever they need to use that.
Thank you, Beth. And it looks like we may have time for maybe one or two more questions here. And so we also have a question: how difficult would it be to test the solutions in an organization's own environment, and is that possible?
I'll take that, Todd. Yes, it's absolutely possible, and we highly recommend it. Our solution, we want to show you your live data. And the way that we do that is we have a proof of value process. Usually takes about 2 or 3 days to get our solution set up in your environment, and we start displaying everything to you back within our dashboard. Very easy, probably the easiest solution that I've ever deployed. Very light lift for the network engineers and security guys and biomed people within an organization. We schedule, a 5-minute call to talk about your organization, determine what your goals are, what is it you'd like to accomplish, and from there we ship out some hardware, and within a few days we're able to display and show value back to our customers.
And I'll just throw in, I promise you that the Falcon agent sensor will be the easiest agent you've ever deployed based on my experience in healthcare. It really is no joke how quickly and efficiently our sensor deploys for either a POV or for deployment. Literally no reboots required. You can do hundreds in just a few minutes. I've never met an IT manager that wasn't blown away at how quickly our sensor could deploy.
Well, it looks like that is going to be all the time we have for today, but I want to go ahead and thank Todd and Craig for that excellent presentation, and also Medigate by Claroty and Crowdstrike for sponsoring today's webinar. And to learn more about this content presented today, please check out the resources section on your webinar console and fill out the post-webinar survey. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon.
All right, thank you so much.